Today, we dive into one of the most profound and transformative books of the 20th century, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. This powerful account by a Holocaust survivor will lead us through unimaginable challenges and teach us how the human spirit can find purpose, even in the most despairing circumstances. From the darkness of concentration camps to the liberating insights of logotherapy, Frankl's journey is one of resilience and hope. Stay tuned as we explore how his experiences can inspire us to discover our own meaning in life. This story is about the everyday life of an ordinary prisoner. It doesn't delve into the horrifying events of the Second World War, which have been documented extensively in many books and stories. Instead, our focus is on the common man who had lost everything, including his identity. It is a tale of struggle against all odds, in a desperate attempt to retain one's sense of self, despite the brutal oppression inflicted upon him in the concentration camp. These nameless prisoners were reduced to mere numbers, their identities and dignity stripped away. They were called schmucks. No, we weren't heroes or martyrs. We were just skeletons made of flesh and bone, fighting for scraps of bread to quiet our hunger while also struggling to retain our humanity. Psychology often demands a certain detachment, but no outsider could ever fully grasp the agony of a concentration camp inmate. Only those who have lived in that world could truly understand. Initially, I wanted this book published anonymously. I didn't want anyone to know more about me than my prisoner number. But then I realized that revealing my identity would encourage more people to read this book. Although I didn't work in the camp as a psychiatrist, I spent almost 3 years there as a sick prisoner. Just weeks before I was liberated, I worked mostly on the railroad tracks, digging and laying them. Once, I dug a tunnel by myself. It was Christmas of 1944, when I received premium coupons, 12 in total, which could be traded for 12 cigarettes or 12 bowls of soup. We were sold as slaves to construction firms, and for each prisoner, the concentration camp received money from the firm. Thus, I became prisoner number 119,104. Phase 1. Admission to the camp. During my time in the camp, I closely observed the psychological reactions of prisoners through 3 distinct phases: admission to the camp, routine life, and liberation. When a new prisoner arrived, they were in a state of shock after witnessing the conditions of the camp. We had spent several days traveling by train, crammed tightly into carriages with barely enough space to breathe at the top. Each coach was packed with around 80 prisoners. We thought we were being taken to Poland for forced labor. However, we trembled in fear when our train stopped at Auschwitz, a name synonymous with death and gas chambers. Soon, we could see watchtowers, barbed wire fences, and long lines of prisoners. The doors of our carriage opened, and prisoners in striped uniforms with shaved heads entered. They appeared healthy and led us to a shed. These special prisoners who guided us were called capos. They worked as guards in the camp and were not starved like the rest of us. Some even thrived in the camp, living happier lives than they did before. Ironically, the capos were often more brutal than the actual guards. Each shed housed around 200 prisoners, and our train carried about 1,500 passengers in total. We all prayed for safety. We were ordered to leave our belongings on the train and were then lined up. Men and women were separated into different lines, and an officer inspected us, signaling us to move either to the left or the right. Most of us were sent to the left. That simple gesture sealed our fate. Someone whispered to me that those going to the right would be put to work, while those on the left were the sick and unfit. When my turn came, I tried my best to appear fit and healthy. The man in front of me directed me to the right. The left meant death, and 90% of those sorted to the left shared that grim fate. Within hours, they were taken from the station to the crematorium, where a large building labeled Bath in multiple European languages stood. Each prisoner received a small bar of soap, but no water flowed from the showers. I learned the horrific truth that evening when I asked another prisoner about my friend who had been ordered to the left. The prisoner pointed to the chimney and said, "Your friend will ascend to heaven from there." Indeed, my friend had reached heaven because the Germans had burned him alive in the gas chamber. Those considered weak were deemed burdens to the camp and destined for death. This was the way things worked there, and human life had no value. Those of us sent to the right were taken by the guards to work. We were ordered to rush to the cleansing station, passing by the electrified barbed wire fences surrounding the camp. The guards inspected us one by one, their eyes fixed on our watches and jewelry. We were given a blanket in which we were to place all our possessions. Some people begged to keep their medals or wedding rings, but no one was allowed to keep anything. Then a guard shouted for everyone to strip within 2 minutes, except for their shoes. We all stood there, naked, in line. Those who hadn't removed their belts were whipped. We were taken to a room where we were shaved from head to toe until not a single hair remained on our bodies. We could no longer recognize ourselves. Then we were lined up again to shower. We were lucky that water actually flowed from the sprays rather than gas. My body was stripped of everything except my glasses. We were utterly naked and exposed, without a single hair or possession, even body hair to cover our nakedness. We stood shivering and wet, wondering what will happen next. Phase 2. Routine and Days of Despair. That night, I stayed in an 8-foot cell with 8 other prisoners. This cramped space served as our bed, and we all lay pressed against one another. We were given 2 blankets to share among the 8 of us. It's a lie when someone claims they can't sleep without this or that. In that tight space, we struggled to find even a little sleep. For a few hours, we could escape the pain. Every morning, we started our day without brushing our teeth. For months, we couldn't change our clothes because the tattered rags we wore were all we had. Bathing was a luxury we rarely enjoyed. Working left blisters on our hands, but there were no medicines to treat them. Dostoevsky said it right: humans can endure anything. The thought of suicide by touching the electrified fences crossed all of our minds. We constantly feared being taken to the gas chambers and burned alive like so many others. On top of that, the guards would often beat us for no reason. We were utterly hopeless about life, feeling like death was constantly lurking over our heads, ready to claim us at any moment. There was another doctor with us who was my companion. He snuck into our cell after escaping from his own. He had arrived at Auschwitz a week before us and told us, if you want to survive, there's only one way. Keep yourself looking fit to work. There were many prisoners who were sick, hopeless, and deeply despondent. These were called Muslims and were taken to the gas chambers to be killed. Living in the concentration camp, all of us had lost hope in life. We could see no escape. From the day we arrived, we had been yearning for our homes and families. What we witnessed was like a dreadful nightmare, disgusting and terrifying. However, over time, we became accustomed to it all. Our despair made us numb to everything. Even a beggar's clothes might have been better than ours. The uniforms we received were just rags. We were given small cells to live in, and stepping into another cell could result in harsh punishment. In these cells, we did everything, eating, sleeping, even relieving ourselves. Our cells were worse than hell itself, and the condition of new prisoners was even more miserable. They were made to clean the latrines, and refusal was not an option. If anyone resisted, their faces would be smeared with filth. Those who tried to clean up faced brutal beatings from the capos. Prisoners were frequently subjected to punishment parades where they were forced to march around the camp for hours while being beaten by the guards. One 12-year-old boy was ordered to stand barefoot on the snow as a punishment, which resulted in frostbite and gangrene. This was a daily occurrence. We saw people suffering and dying all the time. It became so common that it barely affected us anymore. We felt no pain, no sorrow, no pity, and no fear. In our profound shock, we had forgotten these human emotions, leaving a deep emptiness inside, an emptiness that left no room for feelings. I was once placed in the cell for typhus-infected prisoners. Their condition was dire. They were all running high fevers and shaking violently. Many died right in front of my eyes. After each death, other prisoners would pounce on the corpse, stealing coats, shoes, and leftover food. Just 2 hours earlier, I had been talking to the man, and now, at his death, chaos erupted. People were scrambling to grab his belongings while I quietly sipped my soup amid the commotion. Guards beat us whenever they wanted. One day, while I was working on the railway tracks, a fierce snowstorm hit. I crouched for a moment to rest when a guard noticed me. He picked up a stone and threw it at me for no reason. That day, I felt like an animal working in the fields. Once, I was hit on the head twice just because the prisoner behind me wasn't walking in line. At times like these, the pain of the beatings wasn't as bad as the humiliation and cruelty. Frequent, senseless beatings suffocated our self-respect. Stripped of our humanity, we were turned into beasts. Nearly all of us developed edema due to the heavy workload. Our hands and feet were severely swollen, and our skin had hardened so much that bending our knees was painful. Our feet became so large that shoes no longer fit, but wearing them was essential since we couldn't march or work in the snow barefoot. Often while marching, a prisoner would slip on the ice, and those behind would fall on top of them. In such cases, the guard wasted no time using the butt of his rifle to beat us. They told us that regular laborers could do far more work in less time than us. But did those laborers receive only a small piece of bread and thin soup like us? Did they pine for their families and homes as we did, or get beaten like animals at every turn? Our despair was our self-defense, and we had only one desire: to survive. At the end of each day, we'd say, well, another day is over. Our thoughts and emotions had narrowed down to survival and quenching our hunger and thirst. Every prisoner dreamed only of bread, cake, and a warm bath. While working, we would stealthily share our favorite foods and swap recipes. We even planned reunions after gaining our freedom. Everyone longed for the day they'd be released, return home, and enjoy a joyful meal with their family. This beautiful dream was far removed from the harsh reality of our thin soup and breadcrumbs. Occasionally, we'd receive cheese or margarine or a poor-quality sausage or watery jam. Our diet was woefully inadequate for the heavy labor we did, especially with our ragged clothes. When the body's fat is exhausted, it begins to consume itself. Without proper nourishment, muscles fade away, and without protein from the outside, the body burns its stored fat. We watched ourselves turn into skeletons. In our cell, we could predict who would die of starvation next. Each night before bed, I would say to myself, "This body, my body, is now just a skeleton. What was I, and what have I become?" Every morning, well before sunrise, 3 shrill whistles would blow, and we had to wake up immediately. We'd somehow manage to stand on our feet and struggle to put on our swollen feet's wet shoes to go to work. With unsteady steps, we'd march through the snow, and as we dug the railway tracks, we eagerly waited for the siren to blow and signal lunchtime. We were given food between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in the morning. It was the most important time of the day. Some prisoners were so hungry they'd devour their entire meal in the blink of an eye. I saved a portion of my food in my pocket and ate it little by little. My transfer from Auschwitz to the Dachau concentration camp was arranged. Dachau held around 2,000 prisoners, and our train passed through Vienna, the city where my home was located. We were 50 people crammed into a prison car without windows. Some of us sat on the floor, while others remained standing throughout the journey. There were 2 large holes through which we could see the outside. The train tracks passed by my homeland and the house where I used to live. Remembering my home, I longed to catch a glimpse of it. I pleaded with the others to let me reach the hole and look at my house for just a moment, but my words and emotions had no effect on them. No one cared that I wanted to see my home, even for a moment. One prisoner even mocked me. "You've been here for years already? Well, then you must have seen this place well enough by now." Man searching for the meaning of life. From the winter of 1945 until the arrival of spring, the Auschwitz camp was devastated by a typhus outbreak that infected nearly all the prisoners. Many succumbed to the disease, and the sick were moved to separate quarters, although there were no medicines or doctors. I too fell victim to the illness, and to prevent its effects, I avoided sleep and instead focused on crafting lectures in my mind. When I was brought to the camp, I had to surrender all my manuscripts, but I kept myself occupied by writing on small scraps of paper. Even though a prisoner may break down physically and mentally, their spirit cannot be crushed. Faith has the power to keep us alive even in the worst conditions. Some of us would gather in our cells after a long day of work to pray together. There's a misconception about camp survivors, that they were physically strong. In reality, survival here depended on a resilient spirit and unwavering belief that justice would prevail eventually. Sensitive intellectuals and thinkers could withstand loneliness and despair, finding solace in the depths of their souls. Although they may endure pain and suffering outwardly, their spirits remain free, like birds soaring in the sky. When everything is taken from you, your work, happiness, family, even your identity, how do you find meaning in life? When death looms over you, your body shrivels, and no glimmer of hope is visible. What is the meaning of such a life? What can a camp prisoner hope for in such a life? Is there anything left that can give them a reason to live? Or would it be better to give up and abandon the will to survive? As I said, I wasn't a psychiatrist in the camp, but I observed the prisoners closely and understood their psychological reactions in detail. In our daily struggle with hunger, oppression, and death, I had forgotten my training in logotherapy. I realized that memories of love and the beauty of nature were providing the prisoners with a reason to live, even amidst the humiliating conditions. Sitting in my cell, I began writing the manuscript for this book. Sometimes I would counsel my fellow inmates. After all, we were all holding on to a glimmer of hope, dreaming of living freely once again. If nothing else, we dreamed of making a fresh start after liberation. Most importantly, we were still alive, and as long as there's life, there's hope. One morning, we set out to work very early. The guards shouted at us, "Squad, move forward! Left, 234, left, 234. Those who walked too slowly were kicked. We stumbled through the darkness, crashing into water-filled potholes and large stones. Suddenly, the man in front of me whispered in my ear, "What if our wives saw us like this? It would be better if they didn't know any of this." His words made me think of my wife. I looked up at the sky, and her face floated before my eyes. The first rays of the sun spread her smile across my face. That day, for the first time, I understood the meaning of love-filled poems and songs. Man finds redemption in love, only in love. I was a man who had nothing, enduring intense suffering in this desolate place, but the memory of my beloved wife filled me with joy at that moment. In my heart, I started conversing with her. As I thought about her, I asked questions that she answered. Prisoners ahead of me stumbled and were lashed by the guards, but I was lost in my thoughts. Soon we arrived at the work site. Everyone dashed towards the sheds to grab the best tools. We started our work amidst the shouts of the guards from behind. "Can't you work faster, you schmucks?" But I remained lost in thoughts of my wife. I didn't even know whether she was still alive, but even her memory was enough to sustain my hope. My soul, my very being, was imbued with her love, whether she was near or far, alive or not. What difference did it make? The love we have for someone keeps them alive in our memories forever. This is what logotherapy meant. It was crucial that even after liberation, a prisoner must search for the true meaning of life. He must understand his purpose, regardless of whether any of his loved ones were still alive, whether he was alone, his home destroyed, or his livelihood taken away. Even then, he needed to find a new reason to live. No matter what life throws at us, we must find the true purpose of our existence. While traveling from Auschwitz to Dachau, we admired nature with all our hearts. We saw lush green mountains and the sun shining brightly through the train-sealed windows. We watched the sky changing colors from blue to red. Nature had never appeared so beautiful to us before. Even for a few moments, these sights filled us with immense joy. One of my companions exclaimed with delight, "This world is so beautiful." Phase 3. Liberation. The sick prisoners were shown a slight mercy in that they were allowed to lie down on bunks all day in their cells and weren't required to work. However, they received poor quality food and no medicine or medical supplies. A doctor sought my help to treat typhus patients, and I was sent to a camp for the sick in Bavaria, where I was tasked with helping in a cell that housed 50 patients. They all had high fevers and were delirious. Fetching medical supplies for our cell was my responsibility, but these supplies amounted to just 10 fever pills. Only the most severe cases received half an aspirin. There was no medication available for those beyond help. I would check each patient's pulse and then retreat to a corner where I could see the Bavarian landscape. Surrounded by maggot-infested corpses, I'd lose myself in those moments gazing at the scene outside. Conditions in the concentration camp worsened daily. Some prisoners had turned cannibalistic to satisfy their hunger. We stood at the edge of a battlefield. During this time, a fellow inmate and I attempted to escape. Outside the camp, a contact was supposed to meet us with fake documents and uniforms to help us get away. We returned to our cell to gather a few belongings. I put a toothbrush, eating utensils, and tattered gloves in a bag. I was filled with remorse almost immediately. How could I leave my sick companions behind? I decided to make one last round to check on them. During my rounds, one of the patients asked, "Are you leaving too?" I saw deep despair and immense pain in his eyes. I told my companion waiting outside that I couldn't run away. However, my final day in the camp came when the battlefront reached us. All the guards and capos had fled, and prisoners were being evacuated en masse. Everyone was supposed to leave before sunset because the entire camp was to be burned. Only the sick were left behind, still lying feverish and unconscious in their cells. My companion and I were prepared to leave. We were instructed to bury 3 corpses outside the camp. We each went to fetch our rucksacks. Just as we were about to flee, the camp gates opened, and a car bearing a large Red Cross flag drove in. It was a delegation from the International Red Cross, who assured us that we were now safe. They distributed medicine and cigarettes and began evacuating the camp. My companion and I stayed behind with the typhus patients in the cell. In the middle of the night, the doctors arrived, yelling at us to cover ourselves. We could hear gunshots, cannons, and rifles. We were right in the middle of the battlefield, but with the first light of dawn, everything suddenly stopped. A white flag was hoisted outside the camp. That marked the end of my journey as prisoner number 119,104. And that concludes the summary. Thank you for listening to Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl's experiences and philosophy remind us that no matter the challenges we face, we can always find purpose. If this summary resonated with you, consider reading the book for a deeper understanding. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more enriching summaries to help you unlock your potential. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring